The Canby Report was produced and recorded on the traditional territories of the Coquitlam, Mississaugas of the Credit, Anishinaabeg, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples.
It's July 25th, 2024, and there are 814 days left until the Vancouver municipal elections. This is the Canby Report. I'm Matthew Naylor.
I'm Ian Bushfield.
You may notice that I sound a little different, a little richer, more sonorous, and that is because I have, thanks to our generous supporters on Patreon, purchased a new microphone. If you want to continue to fund upgrades to this citizen journalism operation, please visit patreon.com/Canby Report.
You say that, and I'm always very hesitant because this is our first record with new tech, and because it's done remotely, there's always going to be a little hiccup, so it may actually sound not as good as we're hoping it comes across.
We're working on it. And this is why people need to go to patreon.com/Canby Report, is because the more money we have, the more we can put into upgrades and continual improvements. We're always trying to work for you to bring you a better product, everyone. Patreon.com/Canby Report.
Yes, and that also helps support some of the journalism we did for this episode. Later in the episode, I'll talk about an FOI that we spent almost $300 on to get a whole bunch of blacked out pages.
Yeah.
I'm going to fight them, but we'll talk about it.
But we do have to start out with the latest council drama. There is a fight brewing over the Integrity Commissioner. Basically, they are shutting it down.
Brian Montague, notable North Vancouver resident, decided to bring his first motion to the city of Vancouver almost out of nowhere, saying, you know what I want to do as the first thing I recommend the city do? Do a scope of review of the Integrity Commissioner. This is an office the city has had for a little while, and it mediates code of conduct complaints. And he's worried it's not working very well. And that had people rolling their eyes. And then things got even hotter and spicier when the motion actually came to council, and fellow ABC councillor Lenny Zhu pitched the amendment, which passed along party lines, that, it's standard practice when you do this kind of review to just pause all their work pending the outcome of the review. So let's have city do that, and let's just make sure the commissioner just takes a little break. We'll review their office.
They deserve a vacation. While we're looking into whether they're worthwhile and whether they deserve to exist at all, let's make sure that the people who are involved in investigating what we do wrong are shut down. It's, I don't know, somewhat suspicious. I'm very skeptical as to why Councillor Montague decided that this was the thing that was so important to jump into the council fray. It's a direct party line vote with a assist from Lenny Zhu. I am wary.
Yeah, the subjects of Integrity Commissioner reviews aren't public until she makes a ruling that finds someone in violation of it. Otherwise, I think it all just gets buried. And some of that is just so malicious complaints aren't used against people, and you don't use the office maliciously. And some of the stuff does need to be done in camera. The entire process is opaque enough that now we have just buried whatever she's doing or looking into, if anything. And notably also, the Integrity Commissioner's recommendations are things like, I recommend council censure someone, because the Integrity Commissioner has no actual power. We've seen a couple times where complaints have been lodged either against Christine Boyle by the mayor and members of the mayor's party, or by others against the mayor, and some of those have been, upheld, and others have been dismissed.
Yeah,
it's been politicized in this council.
Maybe the slew of complaints that the mayor has gotten over his sweet new office, please see last episode, has overwhelmed the Integrity Commissioner, and they looked at the poor Integrity Commissioner and said, oh no, this is too much. We deserve a nice little vacation while we decide whether or not we need to fund you more. That's obviously what's happening. Yeah, And incidentally, I've got a bridge to sell you. Maybe falling apart. We'll see later in the episode. Speaking of things that are falling apart, the climate action report has been amended.
This was a staff item that came to council, just like an update, a very boring update on how the climate emergency action plan and the other policies the city has going to try to address our greenhouse gas emissions, how we're doing. Staff noted we're not doing great. We could use a lot more work, especially on building emissions. Building, heating, and hot water emissions are some of the biggest things left to tackle. And the way staff wanted to deal with that is by banning natural gas hookups in new buildings for heating and hot water. And this had all gone through under Kennedy Stewart's administration. But Brian Montague, out of nowhere as well, amended the staff report to roll this back and allow gas heating in buildings.
Think of the poor people who must use electric heat because their water will be so different. To be clear, there has been progress. The carbon pollution that Vancouver generates has been cut by 17% since 2007, but this is short of, and falling short based on projections of the 50% goal that the city has for 20, which is an ambitious goal to be sure, but it is at this point likely unreachable. So the response of Brian Montague and ABC has apparently been to throw up your hands, declare defeat, and watch the world burn. Burning, of course, fueled by natural gas in every single new building around.
That burning quite literal today in the town of Jasper.
Yeah, that's a bummer. In what is looking like truly a terrible fire season, like there are thousands of people in British Columbia right now on evacuation alert. Many people have been evacuated already. It's a weird time to be insisting that we roll back regulations that are designed to do our part in one of the wealthiest places on the planet to roll back our carbon emissions to below a level that will at least staunch the bleeding. But we apparently can't bring ourselves to do that.
I was at Coquitlam City Council earlier this month where Forces of Nature Alliance did a presentation for council and committee there on asking my city to implement this kind of step code. The province has a zero carbon emission step code of different levels. One of the highest would do exactly this, to ban new gas hookups in new buildings for heating and water. And council was kind of interested. The province is going to push everyone there by 2030 through the building code. But, the people from the environmental group pointed out Vancouver and a number of other municipalities around Metro Vancouver are leading the way on this, and Coquitlam had the chance to catch up. I got a brief interview with Benjamin Perry from the group, but the audio was crap because I did it outside in the windy day, so we're not going to use that. But, he pointed out that this is an easy thing that cities can do to be on the leading edge, and here Vancouver's taking an active step backwards. It was pointed out that on Twitter that Montague has taken meetings with FortisBC lobbyists, one who was even on Ken Sim's delegation of invited guests to the inauguration of City Council, which suggests, you could take a meeting with a lobbyist and not do what they say, but it's pretty clear FortisBC has a big interest in ensuring they have new customers. I should also mention that this vote was really interesting because it did split ABC. Lisa Dominato and Peter Meisner actually voted against Montague's amendment. They sided with the Greens and One City opposition on this one. And the only reason it passed is because Ken Sim called in from vacation to give the majority their vote. It seems like Ken Sim may have gotten a text from Brian being like, hey, this won't pass if you don't take a break from the beach and join the virtual meeting.
Well, say what you will for Ken Sim, but the man knows where his bread is buttered. He knows that if Fortis, through the voice of Brian Montague, is calling, that he's got to hop to and call in to make sure that natural gas can be in new buildings for the next 6 years. Until, of course, the province fixes it themselves. Cripes. Speaking of a thing that we mentioned earlier in the show, bridges. So Granville Bridge is falling down, and people are falling off of it. Granville Bridge originally had slated to have a decision on the new suicide barriers to be put in, but council has voted to delay that decision. There have been suicide incidents on the bridge since 2019, including 6 fatalities, which truly is horrifying in its implications. But there should be suicide prevention fencing on Granville Street Bridge.
This was a motion from Christine Boyle where she said there's all this work happening on Granville Bridge right now. Let's save some money by installing these barriers that are long been planned now. It'll help save lives. She pointed to Burrard Bridge, which had the barriers installed in 2017, and since then there have been no suicide deaths. So that was her pitch, and what ultimately happened is ABC decided to delay the request, decide to put it into the broader capital plan. So barriers will go in, just eventually. And we actually saw this confusion in some of the headlines. I just did a quick Google search on it, and some of them are like, Granville Bridge to get suicide barriers. And Global News is like, but they've been delayed.
Yes, Boyle's motion coming a week after Granville Island, or the board that runs Granville Island, issuing their own call for suicide prevention fencing on the bridge, which, given that people falling off of the bridge would land on Granville Island, possibly endangering the businesses and patrons thereof on the island itself, it seems like an eminently reasonable request to me.
Yeah, we don't have a price tag attached to it, but I mean, this is one of those things where what's your price tag for people's lives?
Well, I don't know.
Too high for this city council.
Yeah, that kind of argument, that's designed to elicit an emotional response. And sure, I believe in saving lives, but I think that they should have not delayed it, especially given that construction is ongoing. But there do have to be, there's a cost-benefit analysis to all of this. I feel like council was just in a mood and didn't want to spend money, ignoring the requests of the businesses on the bridge, which are outside of the catchment of the city of Vancouver. It's a federal area, so it's not a constituency that perhaps gets the due it deserves, even though it is incredibly important to the city as a major tourist destination, amongst other things.
The estimates are between $11 and $20 million, but most of that funding has now been kicked to the 2027 to 2030 capital plan. So it will be a while before this is done.
All right. Well, that's a certain number of people based on the statistics that we have this far, and I suppose City Council has made that cost-benefit analysis and decided that they can live with it. Either that, or they've made this decision in a mood without thinking.
The other motion Christine Boyle brought to council was to accelerate buses in the city by designating a number of major arterials to have dedicated bus lanes. And council went unanimously with this, which was really good and speaks to the growing strength of movement and other advocacy campaigns to push for transit as an important issue in the city.
Yeah, and I think that's great news. It is, of course, paired with the fact that TransLink itself is in terrible shape. The Council of Mayors have come out with a report that they're facing a funding gap of approximately $600 million each year, even though they have managed to cut $90 million in corporate cost efficiency and increasing revenue in order to reduce that funding gap. They're still $600 million short. And if that revenue is not made up somehow, there would have to be massive service cuts, which could include cutting all bus service in half, canceling up to 145 bus routes, and all night bus services.
They would also be reducing SkyTrain's C-Bus by 30%, eliminating the West Coast Express, which doesn't run very much but is an absolute treasure and gem when I get to ride it. Handy Dart services would be reduced by 35%, having a massive impact on people with disabilities. And their local government road maintenance program, where they give some monies to local governments to help fix the roads would just be gone. So it would not be TransLink as we know it. A lot of people would lose frequent bus service, and it would be very bad.
It could also worsen congestion by 20% because this will drive people onto the roads. Vancouver has been unusual in North America as one of the places that has seen a pretty good recovery of its transit system, at least comparatively to other transit systems after the pandemic. But this would absolutely gut it. If these cuts were to go into place, it's not something that could easily be brought back if you just found that money a year later. This has to be done now because it would take a decade to return transit levels to current levels if those investments even returned, but only a year late.
Provincially, the politicians have noticed this press release because it was pretty eye-catching and noticeable when it went out. David Eby, the premier, has said it's probably a lot of political positioning by the mayors, which is reasonably true, trying to extract some election promises. That said, the BC NDP is going to have something for transit when the election comes around. John Rustad was a little more concrete. He said he would give a couple years of stopgap funding, but that we can't continue this $1 billion handout to TransLink. And so during that 2 years, he will audit and find efficiencies. I don't know how you find $600 million in efficiencies that doesn't involve eliminating a lot of service and increasing fares massively, especially when TransLink has audited itself and not found a lot of waste to trim.
Yeah, I mean,
is in the process of trimming.
The thing that I find interesting here is that we've been curmudgeonly on the side of road pricing for a while, even though Forward Together with Kennedy Stewart was not, in spite of being painted as being such. There has been a form of road pricing, in a way, all the time, because in order to move your car around the region, you always needed to buy gas or diesel. And up until now, like quite recently, there was a kind of 1-to-1 ratio. You had to get that gas, and therefore you were paying the TransLink fuel tax. Given that more cars are electric, and therefore more cars on the road are using it without having to pay for gas, that fuel that's driving those cars is no longer subject to road pricing, basically. So in 2023 alone, TransLink collected $34 million less revenue from the fuel tax than in 2022. Losses are only projected to grow in the next decade. There has to be a rethinking of how we basically can reintroduce road pricing, whether that's a levy on electric cars, whether that's charging people for the amount of time they drive, which really is the solution in my mind. Whatever that is, it's got to change.
Yeah, like at some level, transit is just a public service in the same way the roads are, so you just pay it out of general revenue. But I do get the idea and the value of either congestion pricing or tolls or fuel tax / plate taxes that kind of also work as a disincentive to driving to fund it. The other options out there are property tax surcharges. I mean, all the ways to pay for this are going to be somewhat politically unpopular because people don't like paying fees. You could also just put in a regional sales tax, as we proposed a few years ago, but then had to vote on, and
yeah,
that didn't go well. Sales tax, not the worst idea.
Referenda are bad. Always. We shouldn't do them. They're not actually a good representation of people's will. They can be gamed by the question phrasing, and I hate them.
The Mayor's Council also released their own statement separate from TransLink, and they note a lot of the same things, that they need to see promises from the politicians on how to fund this. They also note they're open to and would encourage a review of the governance model of the Mayor's Council and of TransLink to make sure that people's democratic input is better represented rather than just have people appointed from the municipalities. And I'm curious what that would look like in the end. I know there's been some talk from some of the political parties.
Yeah, I don't hate the idea. And giving a person or a board with elected people on it some more democratic legitimacy than just having the mayor be an ex officio member isn't a terrible idea in my mind. There's arguments on both sides for the Parks Board, don't get me wrong, and I had certain opinions on it, but the way that this is working isn't providing the funding, and it isn't creating a body that I think feels that it has the democratic legitimacy to demand these rate hikes or increased property taxes. It would have to be part and parcel of a wholesale government reform. They would have to be able to introduce things like the road pricing that I mentioned earlier of their own accord. And that actually might be a way to get around it. It kind of Ken Sim kind of promising he wants road pricing for everywhere except for Vancouver, which was, I think, a accident of his platform because no one bothered to proofread it exactly. But it is really the only solution. People have to pay for the services that they use, and roads are a service. If people have to pay fares, there are externalities to these things, and those have to be taken into account.
From services to amenities, let's talk view cones. The other, it's the thing people love to debate about, even though it can be so inconsequential because it has such emotion attached to it.
Yeah. So view cones, just to remind everyone, are areas of restricted height and other zoning regulations that protect specific sight lines to, in Vancouver's case, the North Shore Mountains. There is one from the mayor's chair going north across the downtown core that preserves the mayor's and I guess his gym buddies' view of the mountains. There's 38 of them, in fact, across the city. Vancouver has reduced that from 38 to 24. 11 of the remaining 24 will be slightly relocated or reduced in order to allow for more housing.
Yeah, the hard YIMBY argument was always like, this is one of many layers of red tape on housing, and if we just get rid of all of them, it will allow the development to go higher and build bigger buildings. And at some level that's true, but there's also the element that a lot of people point out, like, what's the point of housing if it's miserable to live in? One of the things noted in the tie-in and other places is when view cones were brought in, developers didn't really oppose them. They liked the certainty of being told, all right, if you build under this or you don't block these specific spots, you're fine. Like, it gives some certainty. There's lots of places to still build. As you know, you look around the city of Vancouver and most houses are not towers. There are lots of ways to build without impinging the view cones. That said, on the other side, the view cones are very arbitrary.
They're incredibly
some
arbitrary.
make absolutely a couple that were eliminated. It was noted that you can't actually get to where the view cone is positioned anymore to see that because of changes in infrastructure over the years. Another one was overgrown with trees. The city could choose to very cheaply trim those trees and restore that view cone, but council has decided to just eliminate that one. A couple others were like narrowed down, as you mentioned, and that helps make a room for a little bit more housing. This isn't the first time the view cones have been fucked with either. In, I think it was Gregor Robertson's era, it mentions in here that they allowed additional height into the view cones if you were building affordable rental units. Larry Beasley in the Tyee article we'll link to says that's kind of a better justification because now, you know, we're allowing the blocking of some of these view cones or impinging on some of them without requiring affordable units in the opposite. But it's the debate where I just get frustrated because they're kind of arbitrary. The views are important, I think, but also there's so much more space to build housing that doesn't have to be 50-story towers.
Yeah, I think that's really the crux of it, is like, is the view while crossing the Cambie Street Bridge all that important compared to allowing a couple of buildings? That area is quite built up anyway. It's not like a lot of those buildings are going to be torn down. I would be shocked if they're like, yeah, we're going to tear down the Park Casino and build something taller in its place. That just doesn't seem like a possibility to me. However, there's a trade-off, and number one, I think the most important thing is that there does have to be an evaluation of new buildings for architectural style. New buildings should look good. You should be happy looking at another building across the street from you. And certainly Vancouver's done quite a bit of like defining of its own style, like this sort of crystal city by the sea, green glass, and still more green glass. But it does make for a cohesive city environment. And I loved it. I really like Vancouver's style. The thing that bothers me a little about this is that Vancouver is still effectively three cities. It's the old city of Vancouver, the old city of Point Grey, and the old city of South Vancouver. And this is a way to smush all the new development into the old city of Vancouver, which is basically everything north of 16th Ave and basically everything to the east of Burrard, I think, or something like that. At any rate, South Vancouver, there's a Canada line running through it. There are so many places, including our goddamn golf course, that could be 9 holes. Like, I'm not even saying get rid of the entire... I mean, I am saying get rid of the entire golf course. But, like, I would be happy to be half pleased. If we got rid of the Langara golf course and built some towers there would be the ability to house at least as many people as you're going to get by eliminating some of these view cones. It's, I think, a unimaginative way of doing city building.
One way to have a little more imagination about city building, Matthew, is to develop housing by just buying it.
Yeah.
Skipping all this development and other things. Sometimes cities can just buy buildings, and the city of Vancouver has done that somewhat strangely with a development that was almost finished being constructed. They are now the proud owners of a almost finished market rental building and liquor store.
Let's be absolutely clear about that. They are the
landlord
of the liquor store. So this apartment building was $38.5 million. It's located at 188 East Woodstock Avenue and has just been purchased. The building, it contains 46 market rental homes and on the ground floor, a private liquor store. It's already in the final stages of construction, and the completion and occupancy thereof is expected soon. Why is the city doing this? That's anybody's guess. Am I necessarily opposed to it? No. I actually think that having the city step into the role of being an affordable housing and general housing provider is a good one. And, like, I don't know what it's going to be like to have the city as your landlord. It's either going to be great or very bad. I can't imagine it being really anything in between.
It all depends, I think, on who they get as their property manager, too, because I think they're going to contract out the day-to-day oversight, and they won't have in-house staff for that, but I'm not 100% sure. Like you, I'm pretty pro-public housing. This is just the weirdest way to end up with it. Typically, what I imagine is the city either taking land it has or acquiring land and developing the housing themselves using some of the advantaged rates they can get as a public body on loans and building it out that way. This is what TransLink has been given the power to do. Just taking something that a private developer is like 90% of the way there on and going, we'll pick up the last 10%, screams sketch. Like, it sounds like the developer was going to fall through, and the only way to make sure that this housing hit the market was for the city to pick it up. It even makes more sense if the thing had been rented out for a couple decades and the city picked it up, like they've picked up some of those SROs that were in dire need of renovation and fixing up. The city saved some of those or expropriated a couple others. That all makes sense. Buying an almost complete building is just weird, especially when we're not even sure we got a great deal. It was assessed at 30 million and they paid 38.5. I know assessments don't always match market. This was all done in camera because it was a land deal, which gets to be done in camera. And it's weird. Credit to Dan Mano for bringing this to the Vancouver Sun.
Now, to be clear, like, we've kind of talked about this as if the city is doing this for the first time, and it's not. Like, the city already owns some existing market rental buildings and has a huge portfolio of non-market housing, over 230 sites, 13,000 units of non-market housing created in partnership with provincial and federal governments and the nonprofit housing sector, including some organizations which we've had on the show many years ago. It's a thing that the city does. I just find it weird that this is how they've decided to do it this time. And it is a unique, or rather novel, approach for the city. And Ken Sim seems to be all for it, releasing a kind of anodyne statement saying something about supporting middle-income housing, blah, 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 blah.
Well, and the revenue from the market rental rents on this building will support city expenses. So, like, there is a net positive here, but it's just weird.
It's not the worst thing, nor is the next, because Kit's Pool, which had been heavily damaged, may in fact be saved this summer.
Ken Sim called up his good buddy Jeff Stibbard. This is the mining engineer who previously helped the city reassess the Stanley Park train and got that running. And Stibbard did some analysis through his mining engineering firm and decided at pro bono, no cost to the city, yeah, you can get all that fixed in the next month. They had their meeting and press release on July 7th, and they say it will be open for August 7th, which is wild. Ken Sim has been blaming the park board for issues with this pool, but notably has been managed and maintained by the city since 2009, as well as all other rinks and community centers in the city. And the city has racked up almost $350 million in deferred maintenance on those facilities, which screams to me like the city's not doing its bare minimum.
So, like, this is the best case scenario for a Ken Sim mayoralty. Like, if you're going to elect the Vibes mayor, him being able to call up one of his buddies and be like, hey, I've got a problem, can you fix it? And doing that on behalf of the people of Vancouver, that's kind of what I think Ken Sim imagined himself doing when he wanted to become mayor, and then got into the job and was like, oh, this isn't what I thought I could do. And it's nice to see Ken get a win in the style that he imagined that he would. There should be pools. We should have pools. We should bring back the Mount Pleasant pool just to, like, you know, ring the bell of my old bugaboo that I like championing.
Yeah,
but
it's one thing Park Board Commissioner Bastio Vansky brought up is it's great if true, but the final assessment hasn't even been concluded. And what he has seen is that there's a hell of a lot of work to do on the Kit's Pool. And I don't live near it anymore, so I can't say how much they've done, but it was supposed to include digging up pipes, replacing concrete, relining the pool. Maybe they finished that all in the last month, or maybe they only had to do half of it. But he pointed out that if we're going to rely, like the mayor does, on his friends who can prioritize certain projects, there's possibly going to be some equity concerns as certain facilities get prioritized over the broader concerns of the city, and making sure that lower income areas are also maintained and not just the flashy, pretty ones by the rich people like Kit's Pool.
yeah, and that's fair. I would be more angry about it if it were jump to the head of a public spending list. If he's doing it pro bono, then, like, great. I'm a little confused as to how this is happening. Like, I am skeptical, and maybe the Integrity Commissioner might have something to say. Oh, no! Oh, no! We've cracked it open. However, that's not the only thing that's fishy at Council. The Parks Board and Council are, in fact, fighting again, this time over West End bike lanes. Now, the desire was to retain the Beach Avenue bike lane. Currently, there's only one-way traffic, and park commissioners voted 4-3 Monday to reject a reconfiguration bike and car traffic plan into Stanley Park, and they touted this as a proof of the importance of the Vancouver Park Board, unique among BC cities, and made it a way to argue against the abolishment thereof.
The mayor and council had rejected some plans for a reimagining of the waterfront area that had been brought to them, and instead they created their own plan to basically expand Beach Ave, have two-way traffic in and out of Stanley Park, and have this bike lane. But to do that, they needed to steal a bit of park. And therefore, their plan had to go to Park Board, and the Park Board was like, no, our job is to protect the parks, not turn them into roads. And so Ken Sim is pitching this as the Park Board doesn't like bike lanes, and the Park Board is saying Ken Sim doesn't like parks. And right now, Ken Sim is kind of winning because ultimately he's probably going to be successful in destroying the Park Board at this rate. But it does kind of highlight the challenge of having two governance bodies often competing over the same bits of territory in this city.
Yeah, and we're not the only ones to have noticed this. Someone who may be a little closer to the action has also noticed it. Kareem Alam, who managed the successful 2022 election campaign for ABC and Sim, has said there clearly is dysfunction. There's clearly animus on both sides. It's not good for Vancouver taxpayers. I would just beg everyone to get in a room and sort it out for the good of the city. And I know that they can get in a room and hammer it out together because they were able to find alignment during the last election campaign. Figure it out, guys. I know you can. Man, what a guy.
Kareem's been doing great stuff post-politics, at least in terms of commentating. We'll try and get him on soon. On the Park Board, back in February, I filed an FOI for lots of additional stuff relating to Ken Sim's seemingly out-of-nowhere decision to abolish the Park Board. Longtime listeners will recall I spoke on this podcast and put a story on our website about how I'd gotten an initial FOIs back from the city and mayor after the Park Board announcement in December that the city had not done any internal proper memos on abolishing the Park Board. And the premier only received a memo after the announcement by Ken Sim on December 6th. So I went back to the city and I asked for lots of stuff, probably too much stuff, because they ended up charging me and taking their sweet-ass time to get back to me. I asked for all the surveys they'd done with the public. I'd asked for correspondence with the mayor's office, internal discussions, draft discussions on the press release, everything from the day Ken Sim was inaugurated in November 2022 until December 6, 2023. They assessed me a fee, which I probably could have fought, but I was feeling like they had already taken their sweet time, and then they had to go to third parties and see if they had any objection to releasing it. So I finally got this on July 4th, where a third of it was redacted, largely for policy advice reasons, and I'll potentially be challenging those. But there is still some interesting stuff in the 130 pages they gave me, and the half of that that's not redacted.
Yeah, 130 pages, many of which are gray.
The first thing that comes up, it's not in order, but the oldest document is on November 20th. A reporter from Global News emails asking if the mayor has comment about the audit report that had just been done about the Park Board at that point. This was the revenue management audit where they looked at, is the Park Board being efficient with how it collects revenue, and does it have a great plan for this? And it highlighted some challenges, it could do better, and all of that. And the reporter asked, we are checking to see if Ken Sim would like to weigh in on the Park Board audit report, generally, given he initially promised to abolish the elected Park Board and roll it back under the elected authority of City Council. It seems like that question reminded him that he could abolish the Park Board. A couple days later, I have an email from Wellington Advocacy talking about developing a plan and preparing some key notes on abolishing the Park Board. This advocacy group includes Katie Merrifield, who's probably the most prominent person there. She's the former ED of the BC Liberals. She worked as Christy Clark's director of comms. She was in Jason Kenney's communications office.
And
she's around conservative politics.
Co-worker, when we both worked in the BC Liberal Research Office in 2011.
Yeah, she's been around a while, and she's quite respected within conservative politics and well known for there. But she's in private consultancy right now and is apparently contracted by the city of Vancouver's mayor. November 20, and she isn't specifically quoted in this, but she was CC'd. On November 21st, one of the staffers asks from Wellington Advocacy for the language from the AG report pertaining to parks, and the city highlights a couple of the global articles as well when they email them. Unfortunately, because so much of the stuff seems to have been done by the consultancy, we can't know about it because we can't FOI a private company.
Yeah.
I may follow up to ask how much money has been spent on Wellington advocacy by the city and any other consultants they're working with and how long, because I have a lot of questions there, but I don't have that information yet. Key messages from Wellington were prepared by November 24th. They drafted up a non-disclosure agreement by December 1st, although that was redacted. And then on December 3rd, it seems like they started meeting with people to get quotes for the press release, and those were finalized Monday, Tuesday, and the press release was done on Wednesday, with only like 2 people having confirmed their quotes by email. So I guess the rest were done over the phone, or I don't have records for them. The Premier's office was also given a heads up about the press release on December 5th, and they got a draft statement. They had a reactive statement as well they gave to the city, but that was redacted. And the city gave the clerk's office the motion on December 4th for the 13th committee meeting. The only other thing I noticed that's really interesting in there is a couple of Ken Sim's initial speaking notes had a cost estimate for how much they would save by abolishing the Parks Board, but those got redacted, and I don't think he included them in his final speeches. Redacted as, again, policy advice or financial interests of the city. And so we don't know how much they think they could save, but they did come up with a number at some point.
This is, of course, not the only FOI fight that's going on in the region. So Vancouver is fighting disclosure not only of the data related to its Parks Board, but also over housing data. The City of Vancouver has asked the BC Supreme Court to quash an Information Commissioner's order to disclose plans for new rental housing sought in a Freedom of Information request. This is in response to a FIPA request for information on housing, but the city claims that the financial or economic interests would be harmed, as would third-party business interests, and therefore it should be able to withhold information from the applicant.
Yeah, what's really weird here is I can't tell exactly what was originally asked for, even reading the Privacy Commissioner's response. It looks like someone asked to figure out how the city was budgeting some of the rental housing programs, and the city said, well, we can't give you that. It's confidential, privileged information with our client. And they cite Coriolis, who did some of their analysis, and it seems like during the back and forth, they did give a little bit more information, but they still tried to argue that some of this is confidential or allowed to be kept confidential, and the Privacy Commissioner rejected that. And now it's going to the Supreme Court to see if the Commissioner's ruling was reasonable. I'm really interested in freedom of information fights at the city because I was looking at the series. They're simultaneously quite advanced on releasing information proactively. They have some great open data tools, and they have annual reports on their Freedom of Information office. But then you can also see that over time, they have been putting up higher fees and denying more requests. Partially, that may simply be, and I think I got a quote from the city of this, that, requests get more complex over time. People start asking for bigger and bigger data sets. And it'll be really interesting to see how things are changing as the mayor and council have changed over time, too.
In other housing news, the small-scale multi-unit housing compliance of BC municipalities trundles along in fits and starts. 162 out of 188 municipalities have complied with the provincial requirements that were brought in the kind of trio of bills that were introduced last October. There are victories here, and I think that's great. However, the one particular holdout, in fact, the only defiant municipality, is West Vancouver. The housing minister, Ravi Kahlon, has notified West Vancouver that the municipality has 30 days to change its bylaws to allow these small-scale multi-unit housing developments, or the province will step in and change their bylaws for them, which would be hilarious, and I think that would be great.
There's no analysis in the province's press release about how good all of these are, because each municipality can insert poison pills to make it prohibitive to put in a multiplex. For example, having too big of setbacks or too low heights. West Vancouver is notable as being the only municipality to just refuse to do a bylaw upzoning their municipality. There are 15 that have asked for extension that are being considered in Metro Van. That includes Coquitlam, City of North Van, and 5 other extensions have already been considered. 3 were granted. 2 were for wildfire evacuations. And the third was the municipality of Greenwood, who is a small town where they're in the process of upgrading their infrastructure. 2 extensions were rejected, including the township of Langley, and they have 90 days to pass a bylaw. And so we'll see if those other 15 extensions get granted. I suspect a lot of them will be denied, but the province is just trying to do its due diligence to make sure they go through. I was actually impressed to see this press release because it tells me we're probably going to see the same for the transit-oriented areas, and the province calling out those municipalities that haven't upzoned transit areas. Doing this all before the election is pretty good to see.
Yeah, especially since, like, if they manage to get it done, it will be harder to roll it back. I still like the BC NDP's chances in this fall's election, but nothing is for certain, and things can shift in a moment. So, it's positive to see them locking in some very good municipal policy. It will be very funny if, as a result of the intransigence of West Van Council, they end up with one of the more progressive and more forward-thinking bylaws in the province because it was written for them by people that they would never vote for in a million years. Speaking, well, really of nothing, Surrey has started exploring the creation of a Surrey charter. So, at long last, now that Surrey has managed to divert its attention away from the ultimately losing issue of having a return to the RCMP and has accepted having a police force, Surrey Mayor Brenda Locke has tabled a motion directing staff to prepare a report on how to proceed in the development of the Surrey Charter. So this would, of course, be a report on how to write a very nice letter to the provincial government asking them to institute a Surrey Charter, which I can imagine Minister Farnworth and Minister Callan looking at and going, pardon me, what? Absolutely not. But on the other hand, Surrey is BC's second largest municipality. It's going to be possibly BC's largest municipality in the future. It's certainly a fast-growing place and has its own issues and concerns, which might, big asterisk there, require specific forms of governance that are not congruent to a place like Coquitlam or Kelowna or whatever. However, this sounds like a little bit of sour grapes.
The letter would go to Ann Kang, Minister of Municipal Affairs. I have to assume Farnworth doesn't need to care anymore about Surrey. He just needs to fix the police there. I don't know. This isn't a terrible idea. Like, Surrey has a justification for having special treatment, but I need to know, like, what special treatment do they want that the community charter doesn't afford?
Yeah, and
that's the only question.
Do they want a park board? Is that what they... Like, that's the big difference is that the park board does work kind of differently. There are other things.
Vancouver gets its own building code.
Yeah, there is its own building code, and there's a different number of councillors. But by and large, the Vancouver Charter and the Communities Charter are largely aligned. So I don't know what exactly Mayor Locke envisions this as being. It's certainly not going to give her that. Like, her powers and those of Ken Sim are not vastly different. Surrey is a very diverse place with a lot of different regions and neighborhoods that don't necessarily share the same goals, and those places need representation. Maybe wards would be an answer, but who knows?
Back in Vancouver, a group of residents has taken a new twist on NIMBYs and said, you know what we don't want in our backyard? Fire stations.
Truly, this is a issue that has arisen over a small patch of land on the northwest corner of Gore and Union. It's just north of where the St. Paul's Hospital replacement project is occurring. Strathcona is one of the areas of the city that has the lowest tree canopy, only 9%. However, there has been a petition that has opposed the fire hall, saying that this triangular patch of grass, quote, serves as a crucial link between Chinatown and Strathcona, offering residents respite from urban sprawl, which No, that's not what it does. You're right in the center. You're honestly one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city. Gore used to be like Skid Row for the Hastings Mill. It's not urban sprawl.
The fire department is saying that their existing fire hall, I think it's number 2 in the area, is way over capacity. They're serving a lot of calls a day. And so adding a temporary hub will allow additional service while they think about longer term plans to service that part of the city. The plans they have will preserve nearly all of the trees that are there. I think they lose 2, one of which is already dead.
Yeah.
And are considering ways to incorporate some public gathering space as well. So the patch of grass could be very well served saving lives, or it could remain a patch of grass.
Yeah, and this is, like, I think it's important to remember that, like, it's not just the, fire department. It's Vancouver Fire and Rescue Service. That's the name of the organization. This is near enough to an area that it sees a lot of calls for overdoses, and that is something that the fire service has decided that they need in order to maintain their 4-minute response time, which, like, in any kind of emergency, fire or overdose, every minute counts. Down by the water, out by the cruise ship terminal, a new temporary Vancouver sign has replaced the old temporary Vancouver sign, which I hated. Unfortunately, this one also sucks. It's shorter, it's pinker, and is truly uninspiring. Despite the truly glowing review that the Daily Hive is describing this as, the Granville Square Plaza in downtown Vancouver becomes even more vibrant with the addition of a striking new temporary Vancouver sign. This sign is like 5 feet tall, and it is hot pink and black, which isn't really, in my mind, particularly representative of what Vancouver is emblematic of. It's part of the Junction Public Market's summer-long takeover of the Granville Square Plaza, and is it's just like a sign for tourists, I guess. It's fine. But, like, honestly, it's hideous. I hate it. And it also doesn't really say anything about the city. Like, there are ways to do this that would be good. I think neon is a great one. I'm going to beat that drum until someone decides to just do it. But this fuchsia half-assed piece of crap is not it.
The vibes are bad. One of the things I do like for tourists, but hasn't been maintained, is the streetcar bus stop at Broadway and Kingsway. This has been crumbling for a little while. It was established and built there in 1988 as part of an effort to highlight the history of Mount Pleasant and the streetcars that used to ramble up and down those streets. It's a lot like the Gastown steam clock. That is a artificial homage to the history of the city, but no one cares about this one.
No.
It just kind of sits there and gets graffitied. Yeah. And now the city is planning to take it down and recycle it.
And I think there should be more character to Vancouver's parks. This would be a cool addition to a park, like a rain shelter with a picnic table. That'd be great. And it's a shame that this particular project has failed. I like the kind of nods to the past that these types of things are homages to, but time marches onward, and in the coming few days, this one will be gone. We end every episode of the Canby Report with a little tidbit of Vancouver's history, because all things like, replica streetcars must come to an end. So too must this episode of the Canby Report. And so this episode's Vancouverata is commemorating the end of AM 730 All Traffic Radio.
Yes, this station was founded in 1955 as CKLG. It did contemporary hits. It's done all kinds of different formats. But in 2006, November, it broke ground in North America by becoming the first everyday all-traffic radio. They would just talk about the traffic nonstop, sometimes interspersing some news briefs, weather reports, and commercials, but If you wanted to know the traffic, you turned to AM 730. But amid all of the journalism cuts, AM 730 is one of the victims.
Yes, it is something that was founded way back in 1955, but apparently traffic has been solved, at least until Translate cuts all the service. Then, of course, maybe there will be a roaring demand for traffic with news on the ones. But it is, just the end of an era in Vancouver. So pour one out for AM 730, Vancouver's Traffic Radio, one of our radio comrades. So we say goodbye to them. And also to you, because this is the end of this episode of the Cambie Report. For Leg and Boot Media, I'm Matthew Naylor.
I'm Ian Bushfield.
Good night.
It's 7:30. This is Vancouver's newest radio station and the first of its kind anywhere.
For the Massey Tunnel, same thing.
Portman Bridge traffic is backed up between 175 and the Scales.
Southbound, not too bad. Stop.
Slow going on the King George Highway this morning, backed up to 128th, leading up to the Patella Bridge.
Right now, the Albion Ferry, you can expect a 4 to 5 sailing wait from Maple Ridge.
AM 730 is Vancouver's first continuous drive time traffic, where you never have to wait for a traffic report, with up-to-the-minute reports from Vancouver's only traffic helicopter. Live from the AM 730 Traffic Center, this is continuous drive time traffic on AM 730.